Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to offer an extremely warm welcome to everyone attending today and for us to be discussing a truly exciting, innovative step forward in our digital future. So before I start, just a couple of housekeeping bits. You should be aware that we will be recording the session, and please, throughout the presentation, please use the chat function and ask lots of questions and challenge our current thinking. The delivery started this activity early in the procurement cycle, so your input will be invaluable. The structure of the event is going to be about 50 minutes of the presentation and then 45 minutes Q&A. For those of you that aren't used to working in the RAN environment, like any other safety critical industries, we take safety very seriously. But normally at this point, when we're in a hotel, we just turn around and talk about where the fire access is, or where you can find refreshments, etc. But what I will say during this live event online is look after yourselves, keep hydrated, look after your posture, and make sure you stand up now and then. So we've got great representation from our commercial and business team, and they are Phil Bennett, Commercial Director for Digital Railway Signalling and Telecoms, myself, Jo Dunn, I head up procurement working for Phil Bennett, Andrew Simmons, who's our Head of Systems Authority, Dave Shipman, who's our Innovation Engineering Manager in the Signalling Innovation Group, and John Walker, who's our Principal Innovation Engineer, also from the Signalling Innovation Group. So before I hand over to our first speaker, I'll just run through the agenda. So myself for the welcome, handing over then to Phil for the purpose of our early engagement session. Andrew will then talk through the context. David will then go through what we mean by synthetic environment and to go through our needs. John Walker will talk through the current status of the programme, and then we'll be handing back to Phil to talk through our thinking around the commercial approach and procurement. And then we'll cover off what our ask is of you. And then we'll go through the questions at the end with the panel and answer. What I will say is we will provide written responses to all questions asked, along with a copy of the recording. And I can't reiterate enough, please use the opportunity to ask questions throughout the event and challenge. This isn't about you guys just sitting there saying yes to us. We really want the opportunity to talk this through, what our thinking is, and for you guys to tell us where we might be going wrong if that is the case. So I'm now going to hand over to Phil that will talk about the purpose of the early engagement.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Phil Bennett, Network Rail's Commercial Director for Digital Railway Signalling and Telecoms, and I'm also the T190 Programme's Technical Lead for commercial and supplier related projects and activities. And I'd like to add my warm welcome to those that just given by Jo to today's event. And that really brings us on to why are we here to do early supplier engagement today? Why are we here? Why are we spending time doing this? Well, put very simply, we want to share our thinking and plans about how to best source and introduce a synthetic environment into the way we manage signalling project design and development. And actually, most importantly, on top of sharing our plans, we want your feedback, we want your views. And that really is what today is about. We want to know your thoughts on, is our current approach correct? Is it appropriate? For you as a supplier, is it interesting and exciting? Is it something that you as a business and a potential supply partner for us want to be part of? Are you able to respond? Are we making an ask that you don't have capability for? Is the way we've structured the approach, the way we are proposing to structure our procurement and our sourcing of partners appropriate to allow you to respond? Could it be better? Our plans are not yet fully formed. We have clarity on what we want to achieve, and we have some initial thoughts and considerations that we've been developing amongst ourselves about how to best do that. But we recognise that that won't necessarily be the optimum way. And actually, your thoughts and views on how we can further improve and develop that are key. So the final real purpose is for you to tell us, how can we improve? How can we make this better? How can we make this more effective? How can we make this more attractive? And I'd like to encourage and reiterate what Joe was saying regarding, please ask questions, please challenge us in our thinking. The purpose of today's event is not for us to be patted on the back by you as our supply chain colleagues and partners. It's for you to challenge us. There is no comment, there is no feedback regarding what we are proposing today that is off limits. And we really would encourage that you challenge, you share your experiences, which in certain cases will be greater than ours with certain aspects of what we're discussing today. And we welcome that feedback and engagement. We'll talk more towards the end of the presentation about how you can actually provide feedback post the event, as well as with the Q&A towards the end. But as we are going along, please do ask those questions. We've got a number of representatives from the team here today, myself, some technical experts. Please do ask us towards the end those questions. So I'll be back a little bit later to explain our thinking on our sourcing approach and the areas and considerations we're taking there. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to provide an overview on the context of why we want to move to a synthetic environment.
Hi everybody, I'm Andrew Simmons. I'm the head of the System Authority for the Network Rail. My role is to coordinate across the industry, not just Network Rail, but also the train operators, to come up with a system for future CCS command, control and signalling systems across the network to bring benefits to the travelling public and also to the taxpayer as well, hopefully. So just a little bit of a context as to the challenges that the industry faces and how we think we can go about addressing those challenges. We know from our analysis of our signalling renewal, our signalling assets, that over 60% of them require some form of attention over the next 15 years. We've had a perfect storm in terms of conventional technology, in terms of its obsolescence, such that so over the next 15 years we've got a significant challenge. So the left-hand side of that box there shows you at the moment we're funding it in control periods. Network Rail's funded it in control periods called, and you can see there's CP6, CP7, CP8. So CP6 is 2019 to 2024, CP7 is 24 to 29. And you can see there's a big ramp up in the amount of volumes of renewals that are required to address the obsolescence and aging of our signalling assets. And that lasts over 15 years typically, and then it gets back down to some normality. You'll see there that in actual fact, if we try to cap it at the same value as our current renewals volumes, you will see that we actually exceed the capability that we have in terms of our funding. And that's a problem, and that was pre-COVID as well. So you can imagine that with COVID, those cost constraints are going to be even harder. The other thing we also recognised is that the amount of work you have to do on the network in terms of putting conventional signalling up means that we have to take the network out of operation, or parts of the routes out of operation, for considerable amounts of time while we change over to the new signalling system. And that again is a real problem for our train operators, because that will mean that we will be able to run less trains while we actually install the conventional technology. So there's the problem statement that we're really facing at the moment. Now, moving to digital technology, and when we mean that, we really mean a system called a European Train Control System, which we'll still be using even after Brexit. That actually does allow us to do a lot of the work off track. There are no line-side signals, which obviously reduces the amount of access required. But you can just see that if we actually just follow the same processes as we do in the digital format, the next slide shows the right-hand box shows you that we still are exceeding the constraints of access and funding. But that's a problem for us still, even just moving to technology. So what we do need to do is actually change the way we look at signalling. And try and reduce those activities. And the bottom right-hand box there, you can see is where we'd like to be. So we would like to be making sure that we can still deliver the volumes that we have, but we're able to do it within the cost and access constraints. So what are we doing in terms of addressing that? So as I mentioned before, we are moving to a digital technology, and that has significant benefits for us in terms of the amount of line-side equipment, but it also had other benefits. It's much more flexible, and it will allow us to meet future capacity demands once travelling public get back to trains. So there's two elements that, having recognised this problem, there were two sort of elements to the strategy. One was a deal between the government and the supply sector called the rail sector deal, that effectively is a plan. Basically said that if the government gave a long-term commitment to digital technology, then the supply sector would aim to get down to European benchmark costs. And at the moment, we believe that cost is around about £190,000 for what we call an SEU. That's a signalling equivalent unit. You don't need to necessarily know about it in detail, but what we know at the moment is that the unit rate, the SEU rate, is around about £400,000 per SEU, and our target is to get down to 190. So you can see that's a significant reduction in the amount of cost that we've got to get down to meet that challenge. And the other program is a research and development program called T190. T stands for Target 190. So that's all the activities in the R&D program to actually get us down to £190,000 per signalling equivalent unit. And this initiative that we're talking about now, which is the synthetic environment, is part of that T190 program. However, we have reviewed it with the sector deal, and the two strategies combined are aligned in requiring synthetic environment, potentially the cornerstone of our development and assurance processes. So hopefully that's sort of a quick canter through what the problem statement we are trying to address. So to address that problem statement, and in time for meeting our commitments from 2024 onwards, we've looked at the timelines, and you can see there that we're intending to begin the procurement of the synthetic environment if after today's event we think we're doing the right thing and we're doing it in the correct way. This is our initial thoughts. We'd like to get a proof of concept sometime around about 2023, and then with a prototype taken to completion around 2024, where we would aim to be able to then use it in anger on our schemes to maintain and operate the system. Now we're looking at a scheme that schemes that take really from 4 years gestation, from anybody thinking of a concept today to we actually doing the renewals on the ground. Takes typically 4 years, and to get down to 190k per SEU, we want to reduce that down to 2 years. So that's a challenge that this is trying to address. Kirsty, can we have the next slide? So what we have to do then is that's the work bank. So just to give you a flavour of the amount of work coming along, you can see more. This is actually from our renewals work bank themselves. So you can see there how we're changing from conventional technology, which is that blue line, to the purple, which is the ETCS. So that's the transformation in digital technology that we're looking at. And we're looking at basically doubling the unit rates from about 1,500 to 3,000 SEUs. So that is, so those previous diagrams I showed you, they were sort of schematics, but that is showing you the type of volumes that we are looking at, and it's a significant ramp up that we need to do. So as I mentioned before, that's where really all this comes together, and that's the problem statement we're trying to address. So hopefully that gives you the context of what we're trying to do.
Hi, good morning. So it's my turn to explain a little bit more about how the synthetic environment fits into our landscape and what we really mean by synthetic environment. And there's some of these terms, there can be many interpretations of them, so we're trying to share a common understanding. But building on what Andrew has just explained, the real opportunity for us to make use of the synthetic environment is all around efficient scheme development. So we've talked about halving the timescales and delivering a lot more for a lot less. So the purpose of the synthetic environment is there to support the design and assurance of the scheme all the way through from early project stages right towards the end of a project, where we reduce all the activities that need to take place out in the real world and use the synthetic environment to do that instead, far more cost effectively, far more efficiently, and far more safely. What it gives us is the opportunity for integration and validation of systems. So these are the systems that our supply chain are going to bring to us, and putting them into an environment where we can emulate interfacing systems, prove as much as possible works before we go and actually disrupt the live railway. By doing that, we do get these shorter timescales, we improve our quality, and we get a safer and more efficient railway sooner and more cost effectively. This was the need before the event of the past 12 months. It's even more pressing a need now. So that's the primary use. But there's also a few other points. So same slide. That it helps us implement business change, because we can bring the new technologies into a visual environment, into an environment that we can work with far sooner in the process. We can get business change started earlier, and we can get knowledge transition and the training of staff undertaken in much more effective ways. We also currently do a lot of on-site testing. This is a big driver in the final end of the delivery stage, and there's a target to get to zero on-site testing. That is a target to work towards. It's probably realistic that we will never eliminate absolutely 100% of on-site testing, but we can definitely minimise it as close as possible towards that target. And fitting into the wider world, and particularly in data management and data configuration, this approach will integrate with that and give us far better maintained data, not just through these project delivery phases, but into the whole asset life as well. The next slide. This diagram then is a very high level view of how this fits, and we've split the project delivery process down into two key elements: approval in principle, which in our historic project delivery process of GRIP was the GRIP 1 to 4 stages, followed by an approval for implementation phase, which covered GRIPs 5 to 7. We are moving to a new project delivery framework, which, along with the kind of changes we're proposing with technologies and processes, will also help to streamline some of those project delivery activities. But we're sticking with the GRIP terms for the moment, just because they're more understood by those who've used them for the past however many years. So in that approval in principle stage, this is where we really talk about a lot of the design processes, going from generic and scheme specific requirements, building the details of that option that we want to deliver out onto the railway. Moving forward into the implementation phase, then there's two parallel streams of activity which integrate very heavily. One very much sitting within the supplier market, and it includes their own synthetic environment in that. But then in the top part of the diamond is where we use our own synthetic environment to help bring all that together before we finally get into the on-site activities of the resignaling scheme. So it's a very much data-driven environment. That's really key to this, but it allows us to break away from the customization and bespoke nature of a lot of our projects and products. Helps us to integrate our processes both internally and with our supply chain, and delivers faster, safer and more reliable schemes. So, you know, what is it? Well, we're not going to go into PC World and buy a box off a shelf that says synthetic environment, plug it in and turn it on. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot bigger concept than that. And we started to think of it much more as a toolbox. A bit unlike this toolbox, though, it'll be far more structured. It'll have separate compartments, and I'll talk through some of those compartments for you in a moment, but they relate to the different stages of scheme development. And then within those compartments, we need to find all the tools we need to put together to deliver the jobs we've got. Now, Andrew talked about Target 190 Plus and the R&D program developing a lot of the synthetic environment. But there's more than that, because some of the tools we know we've already got. We might need to improve them a little bit, we might need to polish them up, and we might need to make them work better with some of the other stuff we do. But there are things that come in that are outside of R&D because we already have some capabilities. We then know through the R&D programme that there are a number of things that we are actively working on that we need to put into place, and they'll form a really key part of this toolbox. And then we also have to accept that as we go through this process, as we start to develop and work through the detail of our synthetic environment, there will be some extra things that we just haven't really got an understanding of yet. And that's part of where this discussion starts, to talk to you, the supply chain, the experts in your subjects, about what else do we need to get in there? Have we thought about everything? What are the pitfalls that we can work around? So as part of this procurement, we need to find the right partner, or probably partners, to help us put the toolbox together, fill it up with those right tools, and make sure that everything then is maintained in perfect condition moving forward into the future. And so the next slide. So this is the real bit of detail, fairly simplistic diagram, but each of these blue boxes really maps to those compartments I talked about in the toolbox. The synthetic environment itself is the toolbox. Blue are the compartments, and within that we will have a number of tools. So starting first off with specification and design. So despite gradual improvements in processes over a good number of years, our whole fundamental approach to delivering a new signalling system still relies on a lot of traditional design techniques. There's a lot of paper-based documents, there's a lot of reviews where people with embedded knowledge of their own sit around the table and look at paper-based documents. Data transfer has a lot of manual elements to it still, and gaps in that, and we've got ultimately a reliance on testing the final built system in the real world. So we're trying to get to a radically different approach with that. The design phase will bring together an integrated design platform, so far more data sharing, far more data integration. That allows us to move things through the process a lot quicker and work towards that reduction from 4 to 5 years down to a much leaner process, but without losing anything, but actually with adding quality into the process. Within that, we're looking at how machine intelligence can help us automate the design processes, how we can use proven building blocks for appropriate technologies to put together to form solutions that we want, rather than a heavy reliance on bespoke project requirements. So that's the specification design box. Underneath that, you've got data, and data is really a compartment all of its own, and effective data management is really critical to this, because as you can see, it runs all the way through the synthetic environment process. It builds up as we develop our design, it becomes more extensive, but it should never be lost, and it moves all the way through out of the end of the project, and that's where we get the link back to whole life matters as well. Moving into the later stages of project delivery, this is where the synthetic environment really starts to become more noticeable, and in terms of integration, evaluation, emulation and validation. So at this point, having worked through the design, we really start to be able to build a full digital model of the entire system. And at this point, we can start to use terms interchangeably with things like digital twin. The concepts are very, very related, but up to this stage, we haven't got that full model for the particular scheme. Once we get into this phase, we should have a digital twin of that scheme that we want to build. And what that really allows us to do is to then start integrating and testing real elements. So from our supply chain, we can get products that we know exist that have been taken out of a solutions catalogue. We can interface them with the emulated system and prove that each of them works in an integrated environment to deliver the project output, and gradually bring more and more components together. So that digital twin provides a framework for us to build a real system, still in a lab environment, still off the live railway. So we're not interfacing with real equipment, we're not impacting on railway operations, but we are seeing that things work as they are expected to work. We can deal with any testing issues, we can iron out any bugs before we get into the final system. And as those suppliers complete those products, most of them will come out of the solutions catalogue already, but there's also the opportunity to feed any new developments that we need back through validating a specific application and putting those back into the generic pot as well. So that gives us the third key area. We've also got a couple of larger issues there. So issue management is about making sure that throughout that process, this is a particular area of data that we can start to follow through the design life cycle, integrate that with the digital model that we've got, and make sure that at the end of the project everything's linked back together. Equally, simulation, we're very hampered at the moment by the time it takes to move things from a relatively paper-based design process into a digital simulation and back again. But through that effective data management, simulation is another set of tools, many existing ones, that we can start to interface with far more efficiently and get those results much earlier in the process so that we end up with the scheme that we want. So at the point we get to the end of the validation phase, the final commissioning, which we refer to as application testing commissioning, is much simplified. That's how we get as close as we can to that element being zero on-site testing. It won't be zero. There will always be something we have to do, but the more that we can switch proven systems into use and just check that they're working as they did in the synthetic environment, the better. Some of the other factors that the synthetic environment gives us. We talked about the solutions catalogue and individual products, and we can use the synthetic environment before we even have a scheme in mind to make sure that suppliers are match fit, that they have solutions in place that do work, that do fit a generic application. We can prove them in that, we can prove that the interfaces work, so that we start with a solutions catalogue that we know has got the components in that we need. That again will give us a really strong position to start from, and we won't be learning as we deliver an application. We'll have already done that learning in advance. The other area it can give us is training, whether this is for maintainers and providing a augmented reality environment in which they can train on the equipment without needing to have the real thing installed. The operators who can interact with the scheme based on the data that it's going to be operated on, and even driver training where, again, real scheme data can be used to feed into driver training facilities as well. All of this gives us the chance of getting this done much earlier ahead of project implementation, so we get a more realistic and timely update of the skills involved. So that's the context of the synthetic environment. Just a reminder that if you want to ask any questions on this or anything that's come before or comes later, please do add them into the chat and we'll start dealing with those. But John will now give a little bit of detail of where we've got to under the T190 programme on some of these elements.
Hello, I'm John Walker, Principal Innovation Engineer. I'm the technical lead for a couple of T190 projects and primarily for today, the synthetic environment. So you've heard earlier some of the challenges faced by the rail industry. The development and delivery of the synthetic environment will address a number of these challenges. Currently, our verification and validation systems are applied to bespoke signalling designs, limiting the opportunity for efficiencies. The processes require the operational railway to be shut during the commissioning phase, causing significant disruption to passengers and freight. And significant cost inefficiencies can be traced to the manual competency-dependent design, verification and validation processes, including the on-site testing. We're addressing these challenges by delivering an open and accessible synthetic environment for industry-wide use. The synthetic environment will help to achieve the T190 plus targets by supporting the efficient, traceable digital design, verification and validation, moving towards zero on-site testing, greatly reducing disruption to passengers and freight. And reduced on-site testing is vitally important. We're not just focusing solely on that though. The synthetic environment will be used across the life cycle of the scheme through into design and operation, as David mentioned earlier, enabling efficiencies in driver and maintainer training. So the first part of this to achieve our vision was the initial research phase of the project, which delivered the Horizon Scan and feasibility assessment. The whole system approach is one of the key drivers of Target 190 Plus. So it's important not just to focus on the technology side of the project. It's about bringing the people and process and information together to provide a solution to solve the problem. We recognise that skills changes will be required, which need to be identified and the required changes implemented to transition from the existing to the future state. We need people to be equipped with the skills to use the synthetic environment confidently and effectively in order to reap the greatest benefit from the technology. Information will be delivered through a number of adjacent T190 projects and brought into the toolbox as mentioned by David earlier, raising the confidence and credibility in synthetic environments data sources. Understanding all of these and by integrating them around the technology allows the changes to be a success and feeds into our thinking throughout all stages of the project. On to the next slide, please. So as part of this project, we undertook a short piece of work to look at horizon scanning, feasibility and road mapping in this area, bringing together the capabilities from Ukraine and practical experience from both rail and other adjacent industries. With Ukraine, we were able to undertake horizon scanning, looking at the art of the possible within the rail industry and adjacent industries. The information from the horizon scanning was used to inform the feasibility report, determining the art of the doable within the rail industry. The work was split into these three phases, starting off by looking at the state of the play within the rail industry and also looking at other industries, the current state of the art. Then we moved on, thinking about how this would be applied to the rail industry to meet the objectives of Target 190 Plus programme. And finally, setting out a roadmap with some milestones and clear outputs to articulate how this could be achieved in a timely manner. So on to the next slide. Firstly, the horizon scan looked at the current practice in the rail industry. We are used to using simulation tools in the rail industry, but they're quite disparate, they're not connected, and are typically specialised for specific areas they're focusing on. The industry itself, and particularly those in charge of rollout programmes, are quite averse to risk and change. Generally, our way of introducing these changes to piggyback on the back of projects, and that causes some issues. In terms of how we use data in the industry, it is quite manually driven, and we often end up collecting the same data multiple times, translating it into different formats, and we don't have this single source of the truth about how we think and use data. There are significant disconnects through the project lifecycle. We don't have that golden thread through the project that could have significant benefits. We know there is other work going on in the rail industry. We're using doors to manage requirements, and in Shift2Rail there are various initiatives such as X2Rail projects, which are looking at the next generation testing. There are also capabilities within Network Rail with the testing, verification and validation integration lab, which is currently being delivered. What we then did is look at adjacent industries. We identified a number of industries where we thought there was commonalities with rail, i.e. where they are of safety critical nature and with distributed nature of control, to see how simulation in synthetic environments might be used. And what we found is that simulation is more common, and there's a more strategic approach to how simulation is used. The actual value of simulations and how the outputs of simulations work with synthetic environments was built into the design process much more quickly. And we observed that the real world testing had been reduced in parts, but more importantly with synthetic environment, the virtual world testing was aiding the dependability and de-risking the rollout and integration of new technologies and processes. On the slide here, there are three specific examples. Colreg, which was around collision avoidance, and the simulation which has been undertaken there, and the standardisation which has been going on in that space for some time now. Work within the military and aerospace area again, which is very well developed. And Thales's work, particularly with driver simulation and driver training. All of these areas is where synthetic environment has formed part of the development life cycle of programmes and projects, and is really supporting the initiatives along the line of what we want to achieve with Target 190 Plus. And on into the feasibility part of the project, that we found the key elements of what we need to do here is to integrate existing initiatives and capabilities and produce standardisation to allow that to happen. There are lots of things happening in the rail industry, but they're not integrated, and we have no real means of joining them up into one end-to-end system that is able to support projects through the entire life cycle from conception through to operation. We are looking at linking tools, producing the data standards that allows COT systems to be integrated to serve the purposes we set out to achieve. We're proposing an approach based on case studies, how those case studies are developed, the criteria for acceptance, and how we consider that, and how we pick up particular use cases to then finalise the industry requirements and build those into a specification. These feasibility stages were set out into a roadmap. So to bring this vision together, it's good to show this on a systems engineering V life cycle. To the left-hand side, we have concept definition, where we consider what a scheme has to deliver, and then we define in detail, all about decomposing high-level mission analysis down to specific parts. And following back up the right-hand side, how we begin to integrate that all back together again through single subsystem testing and overall by systems integration. We then extend the V life cycle to talk about deployment and use and operation. What we're talking about here is a synthetic environment that can support all these stages. At the early stage of concept definition, it starts to make sure the business case works and overall scheme capabilities are articulated in the right way. As we move into system definition through procurement cycles, that synthetic environment and the models underneath it can be passed to suppliers so they can build on it and add what they're actually supplying to the model. That model and synthetic environment can then be used to test, both to support physical testing in the real world, but also virtual testing and hardware in the loop type testing. And then also supporting those integration activities in final validation, again, both in the physical domain and lab-based environment. This gives us much more scope to be able to verify and validate systems, not only from a safety case point of view, which is where we're at the moment, but also from a business dependability and business risk point of view. In the development and operation of the life cycle, we can keep the synthetic environment up to date and can be used by both maintenance and operations, and also to support upgrade programs and all the way through to retirement. So we create this golden thread throughout the program that both saves us costs from not reinventing the wheel many times. We're not reworking the same thing over and over again. We're able to bring the best in class from existing work in the rail industry and in adjacent industries and streamline both in terms of speed, but also in terms of accuracy and consistency in our design life cycle. So now moving on, what does this development roadmap for synthetic environment look like? The roadmap for the development of synthetic environment is based on agile delivery, with iterations delivering working solutions. It will link to and build upon the capabilities being delivered by the ETCS testing laboratory. So that's the previously mentioned testing, verification, validation and integration facility. To achieve maximum benefit from the synthetic environment across the life cycle, it will be capable of integrating in design and data tools, requirements and test case management. The initial phase of delivery is the test-driven synthetic environment development, followed by the development of formal test cases and continuous improvement. During the formal test case development phase, we are looking to establish industry use of the synthetic environment platform and integration with the ETCS testing laboratory. As I mentioned earlier, it's not just a technology project. So during the first two phases, when the people and process elements will be developed and will be piloted with the first applications of the synthetic environment. So it's good to develop a system, but we need to be able to demonstrate it's successful. We will do this by using synthetic environment to take the ETCS test yard through scheme development and implementation in a supplier solution, demonstrating their match fit, proving supplier systems work, integrate and are fit for purpose. This brings the benefit of separating system development and testing from the application project. As synthetic environment develops, we'll be working with the East Coast program to identify opportunities for early implementation where benefits are identified. We expect that synthetic environment will be used in parallel with traditional design processes for a phase of the East Coast program to demonstrate the benefits and test the system against a real-world application. The aim is to be able to use synthetic environment for the selected elements of the first 3 signalling renewals schemes in the long-term deployment plan that Andrew introduced earlier by 2025. These cover vital sections of the West Coast Main Line, Midland Main Line and East Anglia route, including Peterborough to Kings Lynn on the Anglia route and Warrington Wigan on the West Coast Main Line North. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you as well to everyone who's just spoken, and hopefully that's given a good overview of what we're looking to achieve, the reasons we want to achieve those things, and what we think the scope looks like at this point in time. So if that's the what, then let's move on to think a little bit about the how. And it's fairly true to say that we are very much in the process of developing our sourcing strategy and approach. And actually through today's event, we are helping you to shape that. Your views are quite important to us in this regard, because we're very conscious that it has to be an opportunity that learns from your past experiences. This is not something we've got a lot of experience as having done as Network Rail. So we want to learn from others, learn from experience, but also we want to make sure that as well as meeting our needs, whatever process we follow meets the needs of our supply chain partners. That is quite important to us. We very much believe that the solution here is a collaborative orientated solution. And for, you will all appreciate that that means creating a win-win environment. So the right context, the right construct of our relationship, the right selection process for a partner is key. What we do know, though, however, is that we don't expect to run a traditional process. We don't think that ticks the right boxes. We don't think it gets us where we need to get to. We need instead to run a process, a selection process, and form a commercial relationship that is based far more around being suited to innovation and development that the speakers have just been presenting and articulated that we need to achieve. So with that objective and outcome in mind, we're looking at a range of options. You can see them on screen at the moment, the options we've been considering, and they range from effectively selecting partners into innovation partnerships, a whole range of permutations on how we create the right environment there. As I say, the ask very much is to provide your insight and experiences and any particular perceptions or emphasis that you may have from your organisational point as to any strengths or weaknesses that one or other would create from your point of view. And very much a work in progress. What we have been able to establish, though, is our indicative approach. And you can see that now on the slide that's on screen. And this is very much an approach, as I've just been talking about, that's based around collaboration. It's about working with our supply chain partners to develop this proof of concept, prototype, and ultimately take into operation and continuous improvement the solution that is created. We've been a little bit vague here about the specifics because of that desire to earn your view, to hear your views and to take your experiences on board, both positive and negative. But one important point that I would like to stress is we do expect to use an approach that takes us through development to that operational deployment that creates a long-term business relationship. And that's the relationship that, as well as creating benefit for Network Rail and of course for our supply chain partners, will play a part in delivering that critical infrastructure upgrades for the UK rail network. Andrew talked in his presentation about the need to substantially change the SEU point that we pay, change that cost to the industry, therefore change the cost to the UK taxpayer. That is critical. And this very much is one of the levers that we believe will help us down that journey. So this is key in helping to unlock some of that potential, some of those improvements for the industry as a whole. We, of course, as I've said many times, do welcome your comments and views on the proposed approach, either in the Q&A or in the feedback mechanisms that I'll talk about in a second, post the event today. But, please, we've got some questions in there already. Do keep them coming in. We've got some really good questions. I'm looking forward to answering those in a few moments. But we do recognise the requirements that we're looking at are likely to be quite complex. And we understand suppliers may wish to form consortia and early supplier engagement, such as today, is a great way to start that opportunity to create those relationships. And we've had a number of questions. Andrew, Anders, thank you very much. You've been asking questions exactly where our thinking was at regarding, are we going to be sharing contact details for people who are part of today's event? Our answer to that is we will be asking you in the post-event feedback for your agreement to share your contact details. So if you would like us to do that, please, when you get that feedback questionnaire after the event, please do respond. Please do tick the box that says, yes, I'd like my details to be shared. And we will then be sharing those details with all people who subscribe to do that. So we think that adds value. If we were doing this event in a physical way, without the current restrictions that we face, we would all be in one room and you would all be networking. So that is one little step towards encouraging that participation and that sharing of details. So if you want to be part of that, if you want to partake in that opportunity, please do tick the bright box on the questionnaire. So what are your views and thoughts, and how can you let us have those post today? Well, we've talked many times, we've trialed many times, please do put them in the Q&A and the comments boxes. But as well as that, we're offering some other channels for feedback as well. Firstly, we'll be publishing a survey after today's event, and we'll be asking you to respond to that. By responding to that survey, not only will you be helping to shape our thinking and our next steps with your comments and feedback, but you'll also be able to sign up and subscribe or volunteer to partake in other channels. We are looking at doing some structured one-on-one sessions with suppliers. If you'd like to be part of that, there's an opportunity, for example, to subscribe to that through responding to that questionnaire. So please do take that opportunity. That is the first step in that journey to providing feedback and engagement. I've talked very much about the fact we'll be asking that opportunity to get supplier details. We'll also be sharing, of course, post today's event, the materials that we've used, the survey itself that I've just been alluding to, and a recording of today's event. All of those things will be published over the next 24 hours. So you'll be able to get hold of them, share them with your colleagues who've been unable to attend today, and obviously reflect on them a little bit as you provide your feedback. We'll also be taking that feedback on board, and we're committing here and now that we'll be holding a follow-up session and we'll be sharing how our thinking has progressed. I think that's vital. This is, as I've already said, about collaboration, about forming a relationship. This is the start of that journey to formulate that. So it's very important to me that we share the feedback you've given us and how we've reacted and responded to that. This is not a one-way process. We very much view this as a challenge that we need to respond to together. And then finally, please as well, let us know what your expectation from us is. Please write it in the chat, in the Q&A, please put it on your feedback forms. What else would you like us to do? What else can we do to drive and support this initiative? How can we help you to help us? So please do keep those questions coming. We've got some great questions already. Q&A will remain open until we get to the end of the event, so please do keep posting them. And at that point, I'll now hand back to Joe, who's going to facilitate the Q&A session.
Thanks, Phil, much appreciated. And I just want to thank everybody that's attended. By the number of questions that have come in, it just shows that just by the nature of the fact that you're asking questions, we've got the engagement that we initially wanted from this event. I've sat and done many of these over the past year, and I've got to the Q&A session, no questions have been asked. So it's always a relief that we've actually got some questions to answer. So as you may have noticed, there have been some responses, but I will go through them so that the presenters are able to actually articulate what they've written. So one of the first questions in was around the status of the Network Rail current toolbox understood. Is it understood, or will the partner have to help assess the maturity and status of the current toolbox? So I'm going to hand over to Dave Shipman to answer that one.
Yes, thank you. So I put a full response in reply to the question, but effectively it is a little bit of both, and we are working through that, particularly through the R&D program. We're looking at the tools we've got now, the capabilities we need to achieve, what we can do to fill gaps, what we need to do to extend tools, and also particularly in some of the later stages, horizon scanning, what is out there that we should be looking towards. So we've done plenty of work in that space and are building up our understanding, and that will be reflected in what we're asking for. But at the same time, there are still the unknown unknowns that we do need to make sure that we've covered off, and would continue to work with whoever we partner with on this.
Thanks, Dave. There's an additional question around the tools as well. So the area of tools and data covered in the T190 webinar at the start of February. Does this feed and cover the toolbox as well?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So the specification and design compartment of the toolbox is all about the design tools that we use to put together the model that we want to implement. And that very much aligns with the stuff that Matt was talking through on the webinar earlier in the month. He actually covers two areas of Target 190+. One is around asset information collection, which really sits outside of the synthetic environment but feeds the data into it. And then the tools for working with that data and building up a scheme model are the ones that align. So the kind of vision that we've done there, Matt works within my team along with John. So all of this vision and what we're talking about here is all very much aligned and intended to get to the same place. And really the synthetic environment helps us implement that vision.
Thank you. And I've got another one for you, which I'm also curious to know the answer to. What's the difference between a digital twin and the synthetic environment?
Ah, yes. So not the first time today I've been asked this question. I was asked it ahead of the session as well. And I've very deliberately avoided using the term digital twin because it means so many different things to so many people. But I think really what we're talking about here in the synthetic environment is more than just a digital twin, because it's the whole set of tools. It's the toolbox for creating a digital twin for the scope of a particular application and building that up in the first place, and then providing the environment in which we can use that digital twin to fulfill the requirements of integration and validation of a scheme. So it's a slightly bigger concept. It's not a digital twin in itself, but it has a huge relationship with it because it helps us build that very specific digital twin. But then the digital twin we've got is really very much application specific at that point. There may be a full network model digital twin that the maintainers are using or intelligent infrastructure is using to monitor things, or that we're using to plan future enhancements to the railway. And the data we create in this environment would then get ported into that and form part of that other model. So that's kind of certainly how I understand the relationship of digital twin and synthetic environment, and hopefully that works for other people as well.
Thanks, Dave. That's much appreciated. I'll give you a break for a second so you can take a breath. One for Andrew. Will building similar synthetic environments in other asset-intensive industries be considered as relevant?
That's what we're looking for, really. We're looking for, well, I think it's fair to say that Network Rail understand the domain that we're working in terms of the actual CCS system, the signaling systems and the ETCS, etc. Where we recognise we're not the domain experts, it's actually in the development of the synthetic environment tools and their use. So one of the things we are looking at is to sort of support people with that non-rail background, if that's what's appropriate, in terms of making this work in the rail environment. So yes, we are. I mean, and as I think you can see from John Walker's presentation, we have actually looked quite closely at what other industries have done, and whether they're asset intensive or not. Is basically what we are looking for: capability in the synthetic environment field, and Network Rail itself will then support those sort of that expertise with its own capability in the domain of signalling.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think, Phil, you might want to add something to the question around us looking at other countries that experienced and implemented ETCS and other industries' usage.
Thanks, Joe. I mean, absolutely. We are doing that as part of our fact finding in terms of understanding what good practice looks like and what opportunities look like. But also from a dimension of when we start thinking about supplier selection and who are the right people. Of course, the experience that organisations have had both in other rail marketplaces around the world, so that might be in Europe, it might be elsewhere, but also in other industries is entirely valid and entirely vital to that. I think it's fair to say, I mean, this is clearly not something that the UK rail industry has experience in doing, but I think it's fair to say that part of our objective here is to bring in learning, best practice, expertise from other industries. We recognise that if we're going to meet the challenges that we have, the aspirations that we have, merely thinking within the confines of the rail industry in isolation, even across Europe, is not big enough and bold enough. We don't think that pushes that envelope far enough. Other industries are in front of the curve in issues such as we're talking about today, and we need to bring on board that learning and experience into our industry. So experience in other environments, in other industries, is absolutely vital, is absolutely legitimate, and will form part of that selection process, and will be valid, if you like, in a supplier selection process. So hopefully that's the question.
Yeah, I didn't know whether John wanted to add any other additional comments to both Andrew's and Phil's statements.
No, I just want to echo what Andrew and Phil said. That was the fundamental part of the horizon scanning approach, where we looked at what was within the rail industry, and we found pockets of really good simulation uses of small scale synthetic environments, but it was disjointed. And in Europe, when we spoken to other IMs and suppliers, there's no such facility there. So truly, what Network Rail is trying to do to synthetic environment for signalling is cutting edge, world leading in terms of the rail industry. However, when you go look at adjacent industries such as automotive, aerospace, military, it's embedded, it's well used, it's eminently possible. That's why the feasibility report concluded that yes, it's achievable within the rail industry.
Okay, thanks, John. So back to Dave again. Will the solution catalogue be based on various suppliers' capabilities selected onto this framework?
I'm the first one to do the fail to unmute. The simple answer is no. That's not quite the point of that. So the solutions catalogue is about the CCS, the command control and signalling products that we want to put together to build an application. So they're the things that the synthetic environment is allowing us to integrate and test, not the solutions for the synthetic environment itself. So that's about having the off-the-shelf things. In conventional terms, it would be having signals and point machines and track circuits and so on. It's the building blocks of the railway system the synthetic environment is helping us put together.
Thank you. One for Andrew. Will the synthetic environment be a closed environment, or will there be a SOA open data element to it? Okay.
Yeah, I was think to say at the moment we are fairly open on most of our those type of questions. Part of what we want to understand actually is what are the benefits and risks of various models. And I think our gut feeling is we'd like to go open, but we would need to understand what the implications of that. So part of what we want to do, this is a journey, and we're starting it at in terms of the data and the synthetic environment sort of tool set, as it were. Yeah. So we want to learn from other industries and other experiences to help us make those decisions. So our gut reaction would be yes, we'd like to go open, but without really understanding the implications, it'd be hard to sort of say yeah, definitely, or we're going to do it this way, or definitely we're going to do it that way. So it's a journey, and we want to work with the suppliers that we select for this journey to help us come to those decisions really. So it's open, as you were.
Which is the reason why we're holding this event, because we don't know all the answers to all the questions, and we're looking to the supply chain to assist them.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. Sorry. Back to you, David. Data validity. What thoughts have you had to data validity? Safety-related developments will rely on high-fidelity data and accurate emulation to ensure confidence the solution is safe. This could be a significant challenge given disparate data sources throughout NR and has previously been a challenge on other digital twin initiatives?
Absolutely, and this actually relates to another question that was in there about single sources of truth as well, because it's a very critical thing. Perhaps if I'll answer this one, and then we can perhaps come on to that question about single source of the truth. So we are very conscious that data validity is such an important part of this. It can potentially be a big topic, but there's also a bit of a trade-off there about how good your data is as opposed to how good your tools are, especially when you get into the automation world. And you can sometimes balance more than one data source that gives you a better confidence, or a single data source with more than one tool approach that then validates that data. And so there's quite a lot to look at. So we're aware that we need to look at it. And I have highlighted there's one project within the R&D program outside of Target 190 Plus where data validity has been identified as a key safety factor, and we're going to do a specific piece of work on that project to look at what the implications of data validity are. That's in relation to automatically placing temporary speed restriction commencement. So we're going to be looking at that in a fairly captive environment and say, well, what does it mean for this? And then take that learning and see what we can take out of that and add to for synthetic environment.
Okay, thank you. One for Andrew. Will it be hosted on Network Rail infrastructure or in a public or private cloud?
Again, I think that's really yeah, we don't know is the answer at the moment. And again, that's something we need to work through with our suppliers who are working with us. What's the capability? I think that's the way I'd look at it. We're looking at capabilities from these I'm going to use the word tools, and how that's actually delivered. We're not 100% have a view on it. For instance, we have just contract for our system integration lab. We work with the suppliers, and it is now a hosted system, where initially we were thinking it was going to be networked on Network Rail's state, as it were, and we would run it, but that's not where we ended up, because through the procurement processes and through the dialogue, it seemed to be a better arrangement to host it away from Network Rail's infrastructure. If that makes any sense. So yeah, we'll work with the suppliers to determine what is the best way to deliver the capability we require.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I was just quickly trying to publish the new ones before Andrew finished, so I didn't lose my thread. So question for Phil and Andrew. I'll go to Phil in the first instance. Do Network Rail have an analysis of the typical causes of a high current SEU cost? So are there known areas of inefficiency and loss in the current process that the synthetic environment needs to address, avoid?
I'll answer that one. Yes.
It's I mean, absolutely, it's a great question, and I think there's a sort of aligned question that we've had as well regarding where people are achieving 190k of an SEU. Is synthetic environment part of that solution? And I think, as Andrew says, yes, we do have some indication from our working and analysing and understanding both our current SEU rates and also what others have been able to achieve through benchmarking that we've done with other infrastructure managers across Europe, as to where, if you like, the high price points are today, and therefore the opportunity areas. And yes, we believe that the synthetic environment, by changing the model of how we go through that development process, will address some of those. What we know from that analysis is, and this to many people on this event today will not be news, if you like, is that the money really in many ways isn't in the boxes of electronics that we install on the railway or the components that we install. It's in the time and effort and the processes that we follow. It's people's time. It's the fact that the project life cycle today is typically in that region of 3 to 4 years. All of that drives cost. So by changing the model to go through that process, we address that cost base. And given that that's the largest single item of cost in that cost stack that gets us to the 400 to 450k, depending on the project in question today, sort of SEU count, that is the biggest issue we can go at, we can address, and therefore we can make an inroad into it. So it very much is a case of this is a targeted response, where one of the benefits is absolutely about driving to where we see the high cost today. To the question about the 190 best practice SEU that we've seen, did that use a synthetic environment? To the best of my understanding, the answer to that is no. And you know, we say, well, why are we doing it then? And part of that is they were able to achieve that unit rate because of different constraining factors in their industry to what we have in the UK. And a number of the drivers are effectively therefore they're structural. They're about the nature of the UK's infrastructure. They're about the history of the railway as an industry in the UK that add complexity and therefore cost that maybe don't exist in all other operations around in different countries. We need to be honest with ourselves and say some of those are immovable constraints that we cannot address about our industry. So we need to pull some different levers in order to be able to get ourselves to that same price point. And then again, that's where the synthetic environment as one of those levers comes in to unlock a different set of opportunity. And that again supports the fact that we believe that 190k SEU is a valid, yes, challenging, but achievable target that the UK rail industry can meet. It won't be easy and it will require work, but we can meet it. Andrew, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think the other thing as well, that when we looked at this, the cost stack, you've got to remember when you go and put, I'm going to use the word lights on sticks because that's what a lot of people refer to them as signals on the network. They are all designed at the time and they're all fixed in their locations to do with the various parameters of running the railway. And it's really because of the huge logistics on site and to site work, it is a massive challenge to the industry. And it's seen as a once in a 35 to 40 year ability to change the railway. When you move to a non-conventional arrangement with data at the heart of it, you can change the whole way you look at signalling. It doesn't have to be the once in a 30 year element. And one of the ways what we're looking at is to use a synthetic environment to say, hey, rather than worry about whether you will need to have an extra 2 trains an hour in 30 years time, and we better build it into the system now, so and have all that optioneering at the front end of the program, which takes time and money and adds considerable risk to the program. What we're saying is, don't worry about it. We've got a digital railway. We can configure the data very rapidly, and we've got a synthetic environment and the tools to be able to develop those things as and when the railway needs that extra capability. So it's a completely different way of looking at the renewals. It's not a once in a 40 year activity in terms of changing the configuration of the railway. What we're saying is it can be a continuous improvement, and that's where the synthetic environment changes the whole landscape of how we look at renewals. And underpinning that, of course, is the ERTMS system, which, to be honest with you, does most of the calculation in real time, which at the moment we do painstakingly in the development stage. So that's where we can get down to massive efficiencies in our development processes, and that gives surety then to our suppliers who are going to be delivering the signalling system that the design that we come up with after this is right first time, and there's not multiple changes that typically happen as people recognise that it's not quite delivering what they wanted to in terms of business benefits. What we're saying is here we'd finish it and we'd move on and address the incremental upgrades over time. So it's a completely different way of looking at the way we approach it, and I think that really, to me, is where some of the features of this approach significantly changes the way we address renewals today. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Andrew. David, there's a question, you touched on it earlier around a single source of truth. So the question is, you mentioned single source of truth.
Yeah.
I'm aware of a number of projects with similar aims throughout NR? What are we doing to join up with other parts of the business to avoid multiple single sources? And I should have said that we have an additional member of the team, which is Andrew's dog, which you may just hear in the background.
No, it's not my dog today.
No, that one's mine this time.
He's been sitting upstairs.
No, he's right down by the
two
front
members of the team.
Yeah, so single source of the truth. It's a really interesting topic. And I think sometimes people think of it that to have a single source of the truth, we must have a single source for every aspect of truth whatsoever, and everything's got to be embedded in one place. And that's not feasible. But what is essential is that for any particular facet of information, there is a single source identified for the truth for that piece of information. So in my answer, I've given a conventional signaling example because it's a lot easier to explain. But we might say, for example, that the actual position of a signal in real space, the single source of the truth for its position is stored in the geospatial data model. And that's where we go for where it's positioned. But there's a lot more information about the signal. It's got a configuration of aspects. It's got an approach speed. It's got lots of details and calculations that go with it. And actually, those details are all best captured in our signal sighting database. So the two things work together to provide a single source of truth about the signal, but it's not in one place. The location of the signal is in one single source, and the rest of the details are in another. So that helps us understand a bit more then about how we haven't got lots of things going on that are completely conflicting, because there are lots of bits of network rail doing different things with data, but we do need to make sure, and it's a challenge to agree for any particular aspect of the data, what is the system that holds a single source of truth for that. Now, through a lot of the lower level bits of work stream here, there is a lot of joined up working between different projects, particularly things like the geospatial platform and the network model, but there's more work to do on that as well. But conversations are happening on that, and we're trying to make sure that we bring that together as best as we can.
Thanks, Dave. One for Phil. I think you might have touched on this. Are Network Rail looking for a single supplier, single consortia, or will suppliers bid for specific lots of subsystems?
Okay, yeah, good question. I think we are clear that we don't envisage that a single supplier or single consortium is probably the best solution. We think we need more than one supplier. We think the level of innovation required is going to require that. Whether that means we bring more than one party in and everybody works across the same scope in in a relationship that supports that, or whether that means that we lot, if you like, if people use that terminology, different aspects of the activity. I think there's been, for example, a question as well about integrator, and was an integrator part of the scope? So absolutely, an integrator is, we see, an integral part of the scope. Whether we made that part of, if you like, a whole scope or a separate lot is a question that we would very much like people's feedback on and views on. We could do it either way. But absolutely, it's fair to say that we envisage multiple parties being required as part of this solution. Of course, unless the feedback from today's event is, we've got something like 60 suppliers on today's event, unless I've got 60 suppliers telling me that actually we can all do it in isolation, it only does need one of us, in which case we will, of course, listen to that view. But our view today is that we need multiple parties involved in that. We think that gives us the right blend and the right access to the range of capabilities and expertise that's required. Very happy to hear alternative views on that, but that's where our thinking is today.
Thanks, Phil. There's been a few questions around facilitating introductions without pre-COVID, where we used to be in a hotel and have the coffee and lunch breaks where we could mingle. As Phil mentioned, we will be asking in a survey if you are happy for us to share details. The reason we specifically ask is because data protection doesn't allow us to share information without your permission. So if you are eager to get those connections made, please tick the box that says yes, you're willing to share your details. Quick one for Andrew. Does this initiative have funding?
Yeah, it has some. It has funding arrangements in place for the development activity, and we are looking at ways of migrating that into the development, into the actual delivery activities as well. So the R&D, there is an R&D funding line for this. So yeah, for the initial part, yes, and as we get more towards the what I would call the transition into the actual implementation, we're still working with our regions and whatnot in terms of seeing how that flows through. But that's normal practice for Network Rail.
Okay, thank you. Phil, question that we were having a conversation about yesterday. Are you considering including an integrator as part of the procurement?
Thanks, Joe. So yeah, as I just touched on in my last response, yes, absolutely we are. We see that as part of the scope that we need to purchase, we need support with, we need expertise with. Whether we keep that as a separate piece of activity, a separate package or a separate contract, or whether it forms part of the whole is something we have an open mind on. But the content and the role of integrator is something we view as absolutely integral to making this a success, and something where we're very honest and open about we don't have that capability, so we need support in that area.
Okay, but do we consider that as part of this particular procurement, or will that be separate?
That will be part of this sourcing of this capability we are talking about today. Whether or not it is one part of one contract or there is a standalone contract alongside it for integrator is something yet to be determined. Very much open to views on that, but it is part of the capability we are talking about purchasing today, so it is part of this sourcing activity, yes.
Okay, cool. So one for either David or Andrew, I think. Have you started a detailed requirements capture process? If so, at what point will those requirements be shared with suppliers?
Actually, I think that's one for John, isn't it? John Walker.
Oh.
Yeah, it probably is Andrew. Passing the more one of the tricky ones over. We're just in the process. Of starting to capture the requirements now. So I think, as outlined in the presentations, we're very, very early on in the phase of developing our thinking around synthetic environment. So they are at a high level. I think we'll have to take away and think about the sort of timescales of developing those requirements and what that timeline will look like.
Okay.
Yeah, John's going to model the end-to-end process, so we have a clear idea as to how the end-to-end process would work with this, because it is a different way of approaching the way we do our design and assurance. So if we can map it out as we think today, that would drive the requirements, which we would then need to firm up through working with the suppliers.
Yeah. I'd also add that at a lower level, some of the requirements for tools that are coming out of the phase 1 R&D, we are working on what those requirements then become, having done proof of concept. So there's pockets of work that need to be brought together, and as mentioned, that overall process work will bring the higher level stuff, pulling that together as well. So definitely some stuff in progress.
Brilliant, thank you. You got a 3-for-1 response there from 3 of the presenters. Phil, I think I know the answer to this one, but I'll let you answer it. Is NR considering procurement through a specific framework?
Quite straightforward answer. I'm assuming the question there is, are we, by meaning that we're referencing a existing framework? The clear answer to that is no. We don't believe that that is the right approach to take. I think the nature we are looking at here, the mix of capabilities that are required, would fall outside the scope of any of our existing framework relationships that Network Rail has, and so therefore we envisage this being a specific procurement activity in its own right.
Thank you. Another one for David. Will the SE utilise immersive technologies such as BIM, 3D modelling, digital twins, virtual reality, etc.? I think you're on mute, David.
Lost my mouse cursor then. So yeah, the simple answer is yes, very much so. I'll take them more in a reverse order. So things like virtual reality and augmented reality are not new to the tools we have today. Even we have augmented reality tools used for some of our signal sighting and things like that on conventional schemes. But there are a lot more opportunities to use it in a much more extensive manner as we go through these tool sets. Yeah, so those kind of technologies, absolutely. Once we've got the data models there, we can use these different ways of visualizing that. So that is that. BIM, I'm going to get on my soapbox on BIM a little bit, because the whole 3D model part of BIM is a very visible part of it, and everyone gets very excited about that, and it definitely has its place. And you've got the data. If you're doing the right kind of work and scheme, 3D modeling is really important. And again, in terms of asset positioning, we do use augmented reality 3D stuff in order to do that in some of our tools already, and we'll do more. But BIM is about so much more than just the big 3D modeling aspect of it. For me, the real fundamental grounding of BIM is in how we build a set of data that can be used by all the people who need to use it, can be integrated. It's a consistent approach to data all the way through whatever you're doing. So everyone knows, back to a single source of the truth, we know we've got one set of data that everyone's working on. And that's the real bit of BIM that this absolutely captures, to make sure that whether we're doing a flashy 3D model or we're just using a bit of data to support interface validation or whatever, that's the principle that we're really embedding into it, and it's absolutely critical.
Okay, so staying with you, because I think it's a similar theme to the one truth, and then Andrew, if you want to add to it afterwards. How will competing priorities be arbitrated between T190 and other NR projects?
Oh, I'm going to leave that one to Andrew.
Okay, it's a very good question. I think you have to sort of step back and have a look at Network Rail's overall risk profile, and the LDTP isn't going away. Their long-term deployment plan, the underlying issues aren't going away. The assets are getting older, they will become less reliable, and eventually you get to a situation where if there's no interventions to the scale that we're talking about, the average age of the signalling asset will approach 60 years old. In other words, as old as I am, which is frightening. And therefore, yeah, and it, like me, it become unreliable and doesn't necessarily have full capability. Yeah, so that's a competing issue that the industry's got to work out as to how it addresses that. But it's also got other, we know it's got other challenges like climate change, etc. So we had the long-term deployment plan. It has been sort of like agreed with government as a problem. We will work with other parts of the organisation, such as the strategic industry plan being put together, which looks at also decarbonisation and those activities. We know we've got issues coming out of recent things like structures to be looked at, being undermined by global warming and the like. So Network Rail is taking a sort of an overall view, and this isn't going to hurt it because whatever happens, we've got to get the cost down. So this, whether the volumes are going to be 100% or 80%, the challenge is still there. We've got to get the cost down to be able to get anywhere near the renewals volumes that we have to achieve. I hope that's an honest answer, but that Network Rail does have a number of competing elements at the moment. To say, and it's not been obviously not been helped by the state of the UK finances following COVID.
And talking of finances, you mentioned earlier that funding is available. Are you in a position to disclose exactly how much funding is available for the supply chain?
I think that would probably be a little bit inappropriate. Before I can say yes or no to that, I need to go and check on where we are with that, Joe. It's not.
No, that's fine. I thought that might be your answer. Moving on to DARPA model for building a solution. I don't actually know who'd be best placed to answer this one, so I'll just read the question out. DARPA model for building a solution. The right solution will not be easily identified and due to timescales continually evolve. Would you be able to run multiple pilots with different consortiums? I think there's probably about 3 different approaches that could be taken. So I think I'll start with Phil.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a view. So I mean, I think the question in many ways, although I'm not intimately familiar with that particular model, but the question alludes to, you know, how do you best go about getting multiple brains to work on this and to go through varying iterations and pilots of development to get to a solution. And, you know, one of the options that we have thought about and we could leverage in that approach would be running multiple suppliers in something like an innovation partnership type approach, and then testing and down selecting as we went through. I think, and that's an option. I think a challenge with that is whether we can mutually all support running multiple pilots in that way in parallel, or whether indeed a better approach and a better use of the resources and capability that we have, I'll be honest, partially as Network Rail, but also as a wider industry, is to run pilots as part of a relationship with either a supplier or a group of suppliers. I think the concept that we need to run multiple pilots and we need to continue to iterate the solution, I think, is one we absolutely support and agree. And I think, you know, we touched on in our some of the slides about that we saw that. I don't think we think for 1 second that this is about we'll get to the right conclusion, first conclusion. I think we realise that's unlikely. It's quite how we get there. At this point in time, I think, again, if I had to absolutely jump to one approach, I think trying to run in parallel would be very difficult for us. And I think it's probably more around running multiple iterations using a group of suppliers working collectively rather than in competition. But again, you know, part of today's event is very much to gauge views and feedback from the supply chain themselves on that. I can stand here or sit here and talk for several hours about our views and opinions and why we think they're the right things. That is a dimension from us. I'm very clear that this has got to be a mutually beneficial approach, and it's got to be one that leverages the experience and capability in the industry. And I mean, they're very much the wider industry, not just the rail industry. I mean, industry at large, who've got more experience in some of these areas. So your views are very much welcomed and valued in respect of whether or not you think the direction of travel that we're alluding to is correct.
Yeah, and I think just add to that, for any of the organisations that isn't used to procuring with Network Rail, we are an arm's length body and subject still to the utility regulations, so it can be a little bit prescriptive there. I just want to go back to Dave, just to expand a bit more on the BIM immersive question around other industries.
Yeah, I think it's just an opportunity to really remind everyone on the call that you know, we're well aware that things like BIM, AR, VR, immersive technology generally, there's loads of applications of this out in industry, and the rail industry is by no means an expert or even a strong user of this at the moment. So it's really, really important that we're opening this event up to a much wider approach. You know, we don't just want to do new railway signalling with conventional railway signalling thoughts. There are absolutely key subject matter experts in the railway and railway signalling environment that have to be part of this in some way, shape or form, but just as much we need to look at the best practice out in other industries and learn everything we can. So it really is an an encouragement. And when we talk about consortia or people working together on this, there's a real opportunity to bring both traditional railway thinking, modern railway thinking, and other industry thinking together into one output.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with you. I hope you've got lots of water there, David. Keep us hydrated, keep the throat lubricated. Has Network Rail considered in detail how the widespread use of SE for the development of signalling systems will affect the safety assurance process?
Okay, yeah, so this kind of touches back a little bit on the data validation side as well, because that's one facet of that. Under the Target 190 Plus programme, there is a whole work stream dedicated to assurance. So assurance is taken very seriously by the programme, and obviously synthetic environment only forms part of that programme. And we absolutely need to make sure that what we're doing is assurable and is then assured. As we move to a more automated world, that becomes more critical in some ways, because we can't just rely on the ways we did it before. So we don't have the answers to that yet, but it's part of the thinking as we go forward, both within specific projects and as a programme-wide aspect.
I think, can I add to that? We have actually engaged with the safety regulator and also our industry partners as to how this would fit within the industry assurance requirements as defined by the law. And we have actually come up with a way forward with the regulator of which the synthetic environment would fit. So if you like, we've actually put the framework in place already and agreed it already with the regulator as to how we can approach assurance in a more efficient way. And we can do that either manually, or the synthetic environment beautifully dovetails into that strategy. So that's all in place. And in fact, the synthetic environment will provide with its what we hope to have a sort of like a very high configuration management and quality assurance process behind it. Will absolutely support the efficiency that we're working with the regulator to deliver. So yes, I think it. I'm absolutely confident that with the right tool set, we have thought about assurance from day one in terms of how we're going to get these new systems across the line. We've started there and worked backwards, in fact.
Okay. One for you, Phil. Can you give an overview of the short-term timeline? When do you expect to release the ITT or equivalent?
Okay, I can't give a specific date today. Again, part of that, our program is not quite that developed, and exactly what date that would be does depend on some final decisions that we take about approach, and as we've touched on, feedback is part of that decision-making process. We covered in one of our earlier slides today, our aspiration is to launch this procurement event midway through 2021, and that's driven by the date we need this capability by. So whilst I can't quote a specific date today, the statement I can make is the current plan that's supported, as Andrew has said, by the funding availability, is supported by, if you like, the problem statement and when the need is there for the capability. And there's also ties into our wider CP7 strategy development work that we're doing, is that we will need to start this sourcing event in mid-2021. So sometime in the next 3 to 6 month horizon is the guide I would give today on that.
Okay, thank you. Just a general comment to everyone that's still with us. We are aware it's coming up to lunchtime. If you do need to drop off, that's fine. Just to reiterate, we will give written responses to all questions that have been posted today, so you won't actually miss out on anything if that's the case. So another question on the board: how is the synthetic environment expected to be integrated in the inner Network Rail organisation? So you mentioned that you want to have the synthetic environment bring requirements to test linking and integration, including the executions and run of new and existing tools. as it reaches to all the company activities, it implies that interfacing with a lot of people with different sensibilities. So how is everyone prepared for this change, and do you expect the partner to be assisting in these changes? Now, that was a little bit of a mouthful, so I think if I just summarise it, we're going to go through a change process. Is the supplier, partner, consortia, etc., expected to be working alongside us to actually manage that change? So I'm going to open that up because I think probably you all have a slightly different view on that question.
Do you want me to take a first one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. First of all, if anyone can predict what Network Rail's organisation will look like in 2 or 3 years' time, I think that would be a good start. Now, in all honesty, there are a couple of models that we're looking at, and again, we need to talk to our regions to work out what the best delivery model for this will be. I can give you some sort of examples. We could have a centre of excellence providing a service to the regions, or the regions could provide it themselves. So that's just a sort of that's a discussion we need to have with the regions on volumes, and it may be different because different regions have different volumes to be done and the like. So therefore, the business change might change, will be potentially regional, dependent upon when the uptake of this is necessary in scale. The other thing to say is, though, the other question, would we expect the supplier to help us on this journey? Absolutely, yes. Yeah, you know, I do not see it as handing it over and that will do over to you guys. You need to work with it. I think on John's slide, he showed you know, there was up to a prototype stage, and then there was sort of like continual improvement that we're looking at, and that's where we see it as well. So it's not just like a sort of fixed delivery, and here we go, we'll just use it once and we'll freeze it. We see this as a sort of like a development, as a road, as a journey that we're going to go on to, and we would hope that the supplier is with us as part of that journey.
One for John, who's been sitting there quietly. Have relevant certification authorities been engaged, and is there a set of standards that the SE will have to meet for validation and qualification, or is there a view to look at adjacent industries for guidance?
Oh, that's a good one. I think picking up, I think it was on the safety assurance where Andrew answered that one. We've been speaking, or Andrew's been speaking to the ORR about authorisation and use of synthetic environment for authorisations. So we're well progressed with dealing with the ORR and regulators on that, and how that links in with the authorisation process and safety certification from the ETCS side. In terms of certification authorities, I'm assuming the question's relating more to sort of UCAS accredited test facilities, such as those complying with 17025. I see that's more where we interface into the TVV and iLab initially, because that's really the one that's providing that functionality. It's got test case management, automated testing regimes. That's really the sort of side where we'd be looking at the process and procedures and tooling that's bringing in terms of certification and accredited test laboratories. Andrew's nodding, so he might know a little bit more about that.
Well, also additionally, the bit where the main, so basically at the end of the day, it will still be for the signalling supplier to be able to demonstrate that their system is safe. So they will have their own test tools. And going back to the diagram that David showed, that bottom right-hand corner of the excuse me, I haven't got a bit not hydrated. The bottom right-hand corner of the diamond there was where we interface into the supplier's system, and that really is to make sure that operationally it can meet its requirements. You know, in other words, it delivers our business benefits. That's the main part of that interface. In terms of is the supplier's equipment safe, we would expect that to be done in the supplier's own laboratories. And they would need to demonstrate to Network Rail and authorities that they have reach the right standards to be able to demonstrate that that is safe. So I think we'll be looking at it more as a performance and validation tool as around in terms of its operational capability, as opposed to safety and security, which should be at the with the supplier being able to demonstrate that through their processes. The signaling supplier, that is, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Interesting one. If the 190k SEU has been achieved outside the UK, what synthetic environment was used, if any, to achieve that cost?
I'll answer that one if you like, because
yes,
I think Phil partially answered it as well previously. Our understanding is there was none, but as Phil mentioned before, there are other factors in the achievement of the 190k per SEU on the particular infrastructure managers who achieve that, factors that do not necessarily apply to the UK, or opportunities that aren't applicable in the UK. Our operating environment, our legislative environment is different from those countries. So as Phil said, they've achieved it without using a synthetic environment, but if we haven't got those features in our ability, then we have to work harder in other areas. But what we've noted is that they are actually very, very mature in some terms, like project specifications, and that's one of the areas where we can obviously see this as a benefit. Now, the answer is they didn't use it. The answer is they didn't necessarily have to use it because of a different environment they worked to. But we're confident, looking at our cost stack when we looked at it, that the synthetic environment would drive us towards the 190k.
Okay, thank you. So one on metrics over uses. So could you provide overall metric over the uses case you have in mind, i.e. the volume of data, volume of requirements, volume of tests, which are the more versatile and which are the more sure? And also, do you expect to add uses cases along the way, or uses case along the way? I'll open that up to who would like to take that.
Sorry, Joe, could you just repeat it again?
Yes, of course I can. Could you provide overall metric over the uses case you have in mind? Volume of data, volume of requirement, volume of tests, which are the more versatile and which are the more sure? Also, do you expect to add uses case along the way? Now, don't want to put anyone on the spot, so we can park that one and provide a written response if that would be easier.
Well, I think I could just explain, going back to I think again it was in Dave's model where he put up how the end-to-end process we envisage working. Yeah, if the use cases refer to how we intend to operate the railway in the future, Network Rail in the industry spent about 5 years trying to understand what the use cases for ETCS is all about, and those use cases hopefully will be by the end of March of this year, will be in a baseline position where the industry has got a known way it wants to operate the railway. They then form the modules, as David mentioned, sort of like the catalogue of capabilities we expect from our ETCS system in the future. They will be set down as requirements for our suppliers to deliver. And if you like, they will form the building blocks for the synthetic environment. So the intent is that this catalogue, we have produced quite a lot of, there's a lot of work behind it. I mean, if you're going to estimate it, it probably covers 90% of operating scenarios and use cases on the railway as we know it today. But and the intent is, and going back to the assurance process, the intent is if a project wants something different use case, they have to come to my particular group, which is the system authority, to ask for a new use case. If they believe that a new use case is required, it will go through the sausage machine and will eventually then pop out as a new building block, which the suppliers will have to satisfy and will have to be built into the synthetic environment as a new catalogue item. So I think answering the question, if that is, well, if I've answered the right correct question, then we do have quite a, I would say, quite a good set of use cases. Are they mature at this stage? No, they're not. And part of the process we are working through with the signalling suppliers is to mature those use cases as we go into projects and into the synthetic environment.
Okay, thanks, Andrew, much appreciated. So another question, do you see this initiative being related to conventional signalling or to ETCS, or rather that it is either or and an orthogonal initiative?
It's I'm going to say it's to ETCS. Yeah, if there are spin-offs where we can use it in conventional, so be it. But the target is ETCS, because that is the target architecture that we're using to get down to 190k per SEU. And the reason why I want to stick it that way is because, going back to those use cases, they're very much based upon ETCS. It's a much simpler way of operating the railway, and therefore, hopefully, they are much simpler use cases than if you had a conventional, which I particularly wouldn't want to do on a tool set like this.
Joe,
Okay,
can I just add to Andrew's response there, please, as well?
Of course.
And just to sort of, for those that may not be aware, that also reflects the committed direction of travel from a technology point of view between Network Rail and the DFT in terms of signalling renewals from CP7 onwards. There's a memorandum of understanding in place that we will move to effectively ETCS being the default position. So it's really a case of reflecting where we are going as the future, and the volumes of activity Andrew talked about, the funding that was talked about, if you like, in setting the context, relate to ETCS orientated signalling renewals in CP7 onwards. So it is very much about that is where we are going. There will be limited amounts of non-ETCS activity.
Okay, thanks. Question, David, for you, is this initiative in any way related to the TVB&I project tendered last year? So the TVB&I is the testing, verification, validation, integration project.
Yeah, so going back to the image of the toolbox, really, I think TVB&I fits best into the category of tools we have. Albeit it's not a tool that we have completely got yet, but it will be part of the existing landscape of tools, and we need to look at how that best fits into the synthetic environment, what we reuse, what we add to that. However, so that's where we're at with that. It's not a sub part of this synthetic environment as it stands now, but it needs to be brought into the same space.
Okay, thanks. And can you expand on the scope of the synthetic? Sorry, my teeth are going now. Can you expand on the scope of the synthetic environment use? For example, is this a facility that you'd expect to be used for designing and validating timetables, modelling journey times, designing sustainability, designing and testing crypto security?
Yes. I think all of those do feature. Specifically, I think the synthetic environment, as we've talked about before, is about a particular application. So where those things are relevant to a particular application, yes, absolutely, that would do that. So where we're putting products through the synthetic environment, that would look at things like its crypto security or any other security requirements around that. There was a big box there marked simulation, which part of this is about saying, well, when we know what we think we want to do with the scheme, we put together a design and we can more rapidly demonstrate that it does deliver the timetable we want, or that it provides the performance that we need, or whatever factor. So bringing those things in, all features in it. At the same time, we've talked about the digital twin for the application, then potentially providing data to a network-wide twin or model or whatever. So that might be used for some of the bigger strategic timetable modelling or whatever, rather than the application specific. So within the context of the applications we're delivering, yes, I think to all of those things.
Okay, thank you. One for Phil. To assuredly achieve all the aspirations of the synthetic environment, it will be pragmatic to build the SE from numerous tools from multiple suppliers. How many suppliers do you envision being involved, and will you engage a system integrator, which I think we've touched on earlier, but how many suppliers do you envision being involved?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think, you know, again, I'd be very honest and say actually we don't have a specific number in mind at this point in time. I think the number, if we were to go down that model that we've sort of touched on, I think the number we would home in on would be a balance between the number that we can adequately manage and support and the blend of capabilities that we think we would need. I think it's probably, you know, it would probably be in somewhere between 2 and 6, but it is, again, you know, an area that we are very open to views upon, and is somewhere, you can tell by my response, we don't actually have a definitive answer as we sit here today. But I think, and yes, the integrator, you know, would be part of that journey. It is striking the right balance between having a good diversity of experience, capability, thought, innovation, but actually having a number where we can adequately manage collectively to be effective. Ultimately, too many cooks can spoil the broth. You need the right combination of chefs to get to that Michelin star winning meal.
Okay, just touching on also as well on contract award, I'll stay with you, Phil. Is there a steer on whether we'll award the contract for the POC implementation operational support as one single contract, or will it be done in stages? I think your slides touched on that earlier.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. They did indeed. I think we would absolutely see it being done in stages, whether that was as part of a stage selection process or options in the relationships or via a separate procurement exercise is yet to be determined. But I think without knowing, I think at this stage, no one knows enough about the solution that ultimately will be delivered to be able to commit to the right environment, the right cost for the ongoing support. So it would be wrong to try and give that level of certainty and that level of commitment from people at this point in time. So I think we absolutely would see that being a staged approach.
Okay, thank you. What is the expected scale of execution of the SE? Like, how many instances of the simulation are expected to run in parallel? This question is also linked to the level of representativity, as the aim is to lessen as much as possible in real life validation. I understand that representativity shall be fairly high, thus most probably resource consuming. Do you have expectations on this? Andrew?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Okay. I'm not, given the amount of work that we have done in terms of the scenarios and what we're trying to achieve, and we know that ETCS is a far more flexible system than the conventional arrangements. I believe actually on the first cut, because the way I describe it is the building blocks for conventional signalling are quite large, and you have to sort of like cut bits off and machine them and all those other things. Yeah, where the building blocks for ETCS are much smaller, and therefore as an architect you can be more flexible at the design stage with it, and therefore I'm not envisaging as many passes through in terms of iterations than you would do with a conventional. In fact, I'm thinking potentially if we haven't got it right within 1 or 2 iterations, and we've failed in the process of articulating the requirements, going back to John's V model. So very much, I would thought the first iteration is all about getting it to a workable solution. I think the second iteration is then refining it to what I would call an operational solution, and maybe there might be a third after that, but not very many more than that. Now the criticality for us is we want to get it right first time. because going back to cost drivers, what we do know with industry is that if we don't firm up that design and stabilise it, what typically happens in railway projects, unfortunately, is there multiple design changes during the implementation phases. That is very costly. You've got a standing army behind you waiting for these iterations. It brings risk into our network, and it needs highly skilled people to do it. So if it takes 3 or if it takes 4 at the front end, the payback is still significant in terms of the overall project development and assurance. So I hope that gives you an answer. What we're desperately trying to do is cut out back end design changes that just won't be allowed in the future. We just cannot afford them.
Okay, I think we've got probably time for 1 or 2 more questions. So one for you, John. For it to be successful, there is an equal requirement to change the processes and standards that currently drive our signalling renewal cost and programs. How will the changes to those processes and standards be addressed in parallel to the development of SC?
So not fairly simple one to answer this one. So Target 190 Plus programme has projects covering those aspects. So we've got generic design project, which is covering the development and refinement of requirements. We have scheme development handbook, which is looking at the standards and process around scheme development. And then we've got latter end, as part of synthetic environment, we'll have some process developed for that. And then we've got the back end towards the application side, the application project testing and commissioning project, which will cover items. I'll try not to use too much railway type terminology, but basically testing for new works for the new installation and any testing requirements we have remaining for when we're doing maintenance on the system. So we've got those 3 work streams in place in flight. So part of the synthetic environment, we're looking at integrating the program and to make sure that they deliver their outputs in time for when we need them as inputs into ours and vice versa.
Okay, so I'm going to give the final question to, who am I going to give the final question to? I think Mr. Shipman. How is the synthetic environment expected to be integrated in the inner NR organisation? You mentioned that you want to have the synthetic environment bringing in requirements to test linking and integration, including executions and run of possible new and existing tools. As it reaches to the company activities, it implies interfacing with a lot of people with different sensibilities. So how is everyone prepared to this change, and do you expect the partner? I think I've already asked that. It's very similar to what we've asked before with a partner to assist in the changes.
Yeah, you did. Very
Yes.
similar, Joe.
Andrew,
I did. It's been asked twice. How bizarre.
Perhaps I didn't answer it correctly
Okay,
the first time.
I'm off the hook, haven't
It might be that you didn't quite answer it the way they wanted to hear the answer, but we'll have that conversation offline. I just want to say thank you so much for all your questions. We didn't anticipate so much engagement, so it is a great news story for us that it just shows how successful this has been. So I'm just going to hand back to Phil just to wrap this up. And again, thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Joe. We are about a minute away from the end of our scheduled event, so I'll keep this brief. First of all, thank you to my colleagues and fellow presenters today. Thank you to Joe, Andrew, David and John for your contributions and for some great answers there. As well, our thanks go to, of course, our events team behind the scenes, who, as delegates, you won't have seen, but are the people who make sure that we've stayed on screen for the last 90 minutes. And then most importantly of all, thank you to you for your time, your attention, for listening and for your questions. It really has been a very engaging conversation, which is really good and really refreshing, and has made us scratch our heads a little bit at times, which is a really good thing, actually. That's entirely what we wanted to achieve, so thank you for that. I have got one final ask. Please do follow up on today's event with those questionnaires and please respond. I know it's a pressure on your time, but we would encourage that you do that, please. And with that, we'll draw things to an end. Please stay safe. Please enjoy the rest of your days. Take a break if you've not taken a break while we've been speaking. And we will see you again, hopefully before too long, at the follow-up event we've committed to. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please take care.